Vincent Price remains one of the most recognisable faces in classic horror cinema. His film and TV career span other genres, and he worked as an actor across 7 decades, beginning in the mid-30s on stage and working up until the year of his death in 1993. Price also wrote several books, was an art expert and collector, a gourmet cook, and an inspirational owner of the world's best-known pencil moustache. This is a brief look at the career of Vincent Price and at why he became such a beloved cultural icon. Price has 201 acting credits on IMDb, so obviously I can't touch on half of the things he did. He graduated with a degree in art history and English from Yale University in 1933, after which he taught for a year before enrolling at the University of London for an MA in Fine Art. It was in London that Price first received critical recognition for his role of Prince Albert in Victoria Regina. After that, he played the Prince for 18 months on Broadway, cementing the foundations for his reputation as a professional. In 1938, he played roles in The Shoemaker's Holiday, Heartbreak House, and Outward Bound, all productions of Orson Welles' Mercury Theatre. 1938 was also the year that Price had his film debut. In 1937, despite already being cast, his role was replaced in Prescription for Romance by Kent Taylor. The following year he also had another role replaced, this time in That Certain Age, for being too young. So, not That Certain Age. Still, that year he starred in comedy with Sirkian-type melodrama overtures, Service de Luxe, sometimes known as The Hands of a Woman. In 1939, Price featured in The Private Lives of Elizabeth and Essex, and his first horror film, Tower of London.
You know, being invisible has distinct advantages. It gives one a sense of power that's exciting. Power for good, if you're so inclined. Or should you feel perverse, for evil.
Price's career stepped up somewhat with the critical success of Laura, a 1944 film noir about obsession and murder. Price played Simon Templar in the radio series of The Saint from 1947 to 51, and from Laura up until 1952, he made 2 to 4 films every year. 1949 also saw his first TV role, as the narrator in A Christmas Carol.
He went straight to bed without undressing.
It was the 1950s that saw Vincent Price become Vincent Price. The 40s had been successful for him. It was his emergent decade, but he was nowhere near the cultural icon or name that he would become. It was in the 50s that his unique look, his height, and his unique voice went from interesting characteristics to intrinsically valuable to his professional identity. I would call this the second period of Price's career, when he really became defined. He himself said that it was this time that Hollywood started to shift towards realistic dramas and melodramas, which he didn't really fit into. This pushed Price further into character acting, costume dramas, and horror, all of which are now what he's known for, but perhaps at the time was an unknown or risky avenue for him to pursue. In 1953, he starred in The House of Wax, an early 3D horror that was both critically and commercially very successful, and established Price as a non-conventional but bankable lead. Of House of Wax, Price once quipped that it was one of his favourite Hollywood stories, a 3D film directed by André de Toth, a man with one eye. Of course, now Hollywood's progressed a great deal, and you can see many films that have been directed by the blind. Meow. This was around the time Price became active in other work off-screen. The Vincent Price Gallery and Art Foundation was set up on the campus of East Los Angeles Community College in 1951, and today it still exists. In 1954, he starred in The Mad Magician, and in 1958 in The Fly, perhaps now known for the grotesque David Cronenberg remake, but famous in its own right. In that same year, he starred next to Peter Lorre in Collector's Item, a TV pilot that was never picked up about crime-fighting antique dealers.
The actual hand of King David. Really, Chet? Well, why not, Dr. Beasley? Any small museum can show you an Egyptian mummy over 5,000 years old.
Why not the hand of King David?
I like to think that that clip is about Lorre and Price conducting an elaborate and well-managed shakedown. Yeah, they're crime-fighting antique dealers, but you better hand over that Rembrandt if you don't want redecorating. This was the period Price was making some of the movies he's best remembered for. Even though I would argue that his career never went through a trough, really, this was his peak. In 1960 and 61, he starred in House of Usher and Pit and the Pendulum.
On my honor as a physician, I thought she was dead. I swear to you. True. 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 True.
Nicholas.
True.
Nicholas!
Are you content to die there?
In 1962, slightly confusingly, he starred in another film, this time directed by Roger Corman, called The Tower of London. The plots are different, but both follow happenings surrounding English King Richard III.
All you have to do is testify that they are not my flesh and blood. That would make it easier on my conscience, then, would it not, Mistress Shaw?
The following year, perhaps one of the most quirky films he featured in, The Raven.
I like that.
What other film could have Vincent Price, Peter Lorre and Boris Karloff in it? Could be this mad and campy and fun, and also feature a young Jack Nicholson. The Raven is, I think, a great example of why Price became such a star. He's theatrical, classical, and maybe you could argue that his role as Dr. Craven isn't very far from many of his other roles. Maybe you could argue that Price didn't perform in a great range of different roles. But it's so clear in The Raven that he loves what he does. It's so clear that he doesn't take himself so seriously, and that he has a sense of humour.
Hot place to keep clean, huh?
Yes, I very seldom get down here.
Anyone who does this clearly has a sense of humour about themselves.
And they all can take it off neatly, completely and sweetly, no longer completely, and though some like it part way.
And there are plenty of other examples.
Darkness falls across the land. The midnight hour is close at hand. Creatures crawl in search of blood to terrorize y'all's neighborhood.
Not all of his films were so wry, of course. Witchfinder General, made in 1968, is pretty brutal and was heavily censored for sadistic content at its time of release. One of Price's favourite films was the 1973 Theatre of Blood, in which he plays a vengeful actor murdering drama critics. Surely that's an actor's dream. So too, he said one of his favourite roles was the voice of Rattigan in The Great Mouse Detective.
There's no escape this time, Basil.
There was also Whales of August, in which he appears as a Russian nobleman charming two elderly sisters. Perhaps one of Price's best-known roles towards the end of his life was as the inventor in Tim Burton's modern-day fairy tale, Edward Scissorhands. Price's role was intended to be larger, but by the time it was made, Price was ill and quite frail, and he was able to only film 2 scenes over the course of 3 days. Still, it was written for him in mind, and seems in many ways perfect for the public persona he had spent a lifetime building. In terms of how he's perceived, I think Price comes across as the opposite of someone like Christian Bale, a good actor, but someone who seems to be quite intense and humorless. I think that Price is respected not only for being a prolific actor, but also for being a decent person. In interviews he seems approachable, at ease with himself, kind. It's also wonderful to listen to someone so deeply passionate about art talk about it in an articulate but down-to-earth way.
The human eye has changed in the last 100 years, and we don't see things the same way
It has
anymore.
changed?
Oh, absolutely.
In what way?
Well, because the photograph was invented, which freed the artist from the necessity of dealing with reality, and the airplane gave him a look at the world abstractly. The astronauts certainly gave us pictures that will influence art enormously, I'm sure.
He said that he was an amateur in the French sense of the word, a lover, and I think that perfectly sums up Vincent Price. I always got the sense with Vincent Price that he was the sort of person you could walk up to as a stranger and say, "I really like your work, but that film you were in 1970 was terrible." And he would say something like, "Oh yes, it was, but it was very fun to do." He was a gentleman.
Green Hell.
Oh.
Now that was a movie and a quarter.
Green Hell would have been a hell of a picture in any color, I'll tell you that. It was almost the worst picture ever made. There were clubs who joined up and went in buses to see it.
There is, of course, a lot I haven't touched on. 800 plus performances in his one-man show, Diversions and Delights. The abominable Dr. Phibes. The art and cookbooks he wrote. The fact he was the visual template for Doctor Strange.
I think, you know, that to want to be an actor is an extraordinary privilege in a way, but it also requires a tremendous amount of discipline. It requires the kind of discipline that all the arts require, the discipline to survive and to last in it. I never wanted to just do Victoria Regina and then disappear. And I know an awful lot of people thought, well, you can't have a break like that when you're 23 and survive in the business. Well, I've been in it pretty near 40 years now. And it's my whole life. I can't think of any other way of life.
I'd love to know, what's your favourite film featuring Vincent Price? Join me next time where I will be discussing the Body Snatchers films and how they reflect the decades in which they were made. Thanks for watching, and be sure to like, comment and subscribe. See you next time.
Yeah!